But what's different about Trump than these previous U.S. presidents is that he seems to be really, really concerned about not upsetting Putin, not doing anything that's going to upset him, and we haven't seen that before. When George Bush got tired of Putin, he got tough. When Obama got tired of Putin, he got tough, and we haven't seen that with President Trump.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I am joined by Sir Bill Browder, and just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on Times Radio's YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Bill, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be here.
We've got to start off with what's happening in the last few days with Donald Trump's state visit to the UK. We've seen him and Keir Starmer really band together. We were hoping for more of an outcome when it came to ending the Ukraine war. But what we've seen is Trump said about Putin. He said, I thought this war would be one of the easiest to solve because of my relationship with Putin, but he has really let me down. I mean, frankly, Russian soldiers are being killed at a higher rate than the Ukrainian soldiers, but yeah, he's let me down. So your reaction to that from Donald Trump?
Well, I've stopped listening to his, little words and slogans and statements because they don't really have any significance. We know where he stands. The U.S. has stopped supplying military aid to Ukraine. He has at various points blamed the war on Zelensky, and as recently as last week. He has not followed through on any of his ultimatums for Putin to cease fire. He's not rolled out devastating sanctions as he's threatened to do 7 times and not come through with them. And so what he says at any moment in time really has no bearing on the reality. The reality is that for reasons that most of us, perhaps none of us, will ever understand, he has decided that he doesn't want to come down hard on Putin. And if he doesn't come down hard on Putin, the war will carry on. And that is what's happening.
Well, we know that Trump considers himself a bit of a peacemaker. We know that he's eager to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. But do you think, Bill, that it's quite arrogant and ignorant from Donald Trump to call it an easy war to solve? You and I know that this is a pretty simple war. It's black and white in the sense that an aggressor invaded a sovereign country. There's no complications to this other than that. But is it ignorant and arrogant for the US president to believe that he could have so easily solved this within a 24-hour period?
Well, it's interesting because, yes, it is arrogant. And the arrogance sort of goes with the job of the US president. When Barack Obama was the president, the relationship between the United States and Russia was terrible after the Bush years, and so Obama thought, well, I'm such a great guy. I just got elected president of the United States. I'm going to reset relations with Russia, and my personal charm is going to work. And of course, that didn't happen. And it's George Bush, when he came into office, he sat down with Putin, and there was this famous expression: "I looked into his eyes and saw his soul." And it never works out for any of these guys. And the fact that Trump thought, I'm such a great guy, I'm the president of the United States, I'm going to, talk to Putin, we're going to sort this out because I'm such a great guy and we have such a good relationship, is just, misunderstanding Putin. And Putin, he laughs at all of these American presidents. By any of these presidents, making these statements, it buys Putin 6 months, a year before everybody finally realizes that there's nothing that can be done with Putin, that he is just taking advantage of people, that he is a manipulator, a KGB operative, and that's the way he goes about stuff. So yes, it is arrogant. It's an arrogance of the U.S. presidency. But what's different about Trump than these previous U.S. presidents is that he seems to be really, really concerned about not upsetting Putin, not doing anything that's going to upset him. And we haven't seen that before. When George Bush got tired of Putin, he got tough. When Obama got tired of Putin, he got tough. And we haven't seen that with President Trump.
A few weeks ago, Bill, we saw Donald Trump tell reporters that he was in fact ready to launch phase 2 of these sanctions, given that that was a threat that he had been saying for months, a threat of which got us to the Alaska summit. But last week, and again while Trump has been in the UK, he backed flip on this and he said that if the price of oil comes down, Putin's going to drop out. He's going to have no choice. I'm willing to do other things, but not when the people that I'm fighting for are buying oil from Russia. So he's basically saying, in other words, Trump won't put US sanctions on Russia, further sanctions, I should say, until Hungary, Slovakia and Turkey stop buying Russian oil. So do you think that is a fair compromise from the US president?
I think it's absurd. The amount of oil that's being bought by Hungary, Slovakia, and Turkey is de minimis. It's absurd to say that. So he's basically saying he's going to allow Putin to continue the war because some stragglers, some countries that are sort of not cooperating are continuing to buy Russian oil. That doesn't make any sense at all. And it looks like, from where I sit, just a way for him to justify the fact that he's not been tough on Putin because for whatever reason he's scared of being tough on Putin.
Is the other way you look at it, Bill, is this him more so ceding leadership on Ukraine over to Europe?
He's not ceding leadership. He basically, for reasons that we will never know, he just wants this. He wants Putin to have his way, and it's not like Europe is jumping into this position and taking over. And in fact, he doesn't even want that to happen. He made a statement, I believe it was last week, where he said, Europe is now the one causing this war to continue. He blamed the war's continuation on Europe. And so, I mean, we just can't listen to the words that he says because they mean nothing.
Right now, Bill, I mean, look, you've obviously been incredibly pessimistic in the US's involvement in this, and completely fair enough. But right now, as you and I speak, it does seem more unlikely that we will see another sanctions package from the United States. Zelensky called for one this week and he urged Trump to not delay imposing them while he waits for these NATO countries, as we mentioned, to stop buying Russian oil. But it does seem that Trump is stalling, and we haven't really had many updates since Congress resumed from this bipartisan sanctions bill from Lindsey Graham, which was co-sponsored by 85 out of 100 senators. So do you think it's very unlikely that we will see further sanctions from the US?
I think that it's possible still that we could see sanctions from the US, but it would not be initiated by President Trump. It would be initiated by the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress could pass Lindsey Graham's sanctions law. And if that happened, then with 85 co-sponsors, Trump can't veto it, and then it would have to happen, unless he wanted to just ignore the law, which is also possible. But at the moment, we're in this very strange place where the American people don't like Putin and they support Ukraine. The Republican Party doesn't like Putin and supports Ukraine. But it's just this one individual who has all the power, Donald Trump, who seems to like Putin and not support Ukraine.
But Bill, it hasn't been brought to the Senate floor yet. We thought that it might happen at the start of September when they did resume. So it does seem as if Lindsey Graham might be tiptoeing around, not really wanting to put this forward in case it upsets Trump.
That's exactly right. So Trump is not going to allow Lindsey Graham to dictate U.S. foreign policy. And everybody's, of course, in the Republican Party desperately afraid of Trump. And so I can't imagine that they would defy him in this way. But it is possible. I mean, there's a moment where something so horrible happens that Putin does that it requires some action. And if Trump doesn't take the action, then the U.S. Senate might do that. But at the moment, Lindsey Graham is a good soldier. He's doing what he's told. Donald Trump has told him, don't put this piece of legislation forward, and he has not.
Another thing that Donald Trump mentioned on his trip in the UK, another, I guess, pivot away from actually slapping these further sanctions on Russia, is that he urged for more oil production in the North Sea, and that for Starmer to move away from wind turbines. He called them an expensive joke. Starmer, of course, he's committed to a government that is focusing on clean energy. So if they were to pump more oil, it would be costly. It would, but there is recoverable oil available, but it's politically, it's contradictory, obviously, for the Starmer government. So is there a world in which you see the UK government doing this for Ukraine?
Well, so in the world of oil production, if a country wants to produce more oil, a place like the UK in the North Sea, it's not like they can just say, okay, we're going to take that decision today. We're going to flip the switch, and tomorrow you have more oil. It requires tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. The investment has to be made. Then the oil will eventually start flowing, but that's sort of like a 5 or 10 year process. To imagine that they could just flip a switch and the oil would come, that's not how the oil industry works. Now, it does work that way in certain countries, like Saudi Arabia has a lot of capacity. They have spare capacity, and they could turn on that spare capacity. But to think that the UK has that spare capacity, that's just not true.
The other thing that happened this week, Bill, Vladimir Putin, he fired Dmitry Kozak, his deputy head of the presidential administration, or he resigned. We're not quite sure the real story behind it, but several analysts have reported that Kozak was fired or resigned over concerns because he was concerned about Russia's full-scale invasion and had been actually proposing several peace talks and settlements. Obviously, that didn't go down with well with Vladimir Putin. So can you walk me through, Bill, just from your, a lot of time spending looking into the brain of President Putin, what the likely case scenario is that happened here with Kozak if he was opposing the war?
Well, if he genuinely opposed the war, if he was an anti-war person, he wouldn't have been sitting in his seat up until today. He would have fallen out of a window, been poisoned, or been sent to Siberia. So to think that Dmitry Kozak was anti-war, that's not a possible combination of being anti-war and sitting in the Russian government in a senior position. Perhaps he had a slightly more dovish approach to the war. There are lots of different opinions about the war, but to think that he was anti-war is not a possibility. And the other thing we need to consider is that there's a million different reasons why people leave the government. There's financial shenanigans. There's deals that have been broken. There's places that need to be filled up with better, friendlier faces. There could be a whole number of reasons why this guy has left, and all of a sudden everybody is saying, well, he made one statement at one point that was not like fully pro-war. That must be the reason. Who knows? I mean, the Russian government is a medieval place where things happen for reasons that we'll never know. And so I wouldn't spend too much time reading anything into it, because Putin is the only guy who makes any decisions in Russia. There is nobody else. He doesn't matter what his cabinet thinks. Doesn't matter what his parliament thinks. Doesn't matter what the media thinks. Doesn't matter what the people of Russia think. He's a dictator, and so what he decides to do is what happens. Whatever the sort of strange goings on are in the Kremlin, there's probably 7 other layers of complexity that we'll never have an opportunity to see or analyze, and these are all effectively nameless, faceless individuals who are working for Putin, and I wouldn't put any stock in their coming or going, because it really doesn't matter.
But if it is a case, Bill, where a high-level Kremlin official grew tired of the war, didn't necessarily start as anti-war, but maybe became a little bit more resistant to what the Kremlin had been doing, it does kind of show what you've been saying for how many years, that Putin never really wanted peace, and that any sort of peace negotiations, any table negotiations that he's had are just all for show.
Well, there's absolutely 100% certainty that Putin needs this war in order to stay in power. He needs this war because he needs a foreign enemy. He can't have the Russian people mad at him. And the other thing which has emerged now is that they've created this army of savages. There's 1 million Russian men who are in the army who have turned into the most horrible savages. And what do they do with these people if the war were to come to an end, which I don't believe there's any chance of anyways, but they would be going back murdering, raping, stealing, and destroying inside Russia. It would create the most horrible situation. And so they kind of need these guys out there fighting. Putin needs to be at war so that the Russian people can look outward at a foreign enemy, not inward at their own problems. And I don't think that there's any chance that this thing is going to end anytime soon.
An interesting quote, though, on that note from Sir Richard Moore, Bill, head of MI6. He said that Russia is grinding forward on the battlefield at a snail's pace and at horrendous cost. Now, we already know that Russia's actually only made 1% of advancement since November 2022, and they've lost around 1 million soldiers. He said that Putin seeks to impose his imperial will by all means at his disposal, but he cannot succeed. Russia simply does not have the wherewithal to fully subjugate Ukraine by force. So it's a pretty enlightening statement from the head of MI6 to say that Russian forces basically aren't strong enough to take Ukraine by force.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most remarkable thing. So Ukraine is totally dwarfed in terms of financial resources, military resources, every type of resource, but they've held Russia back. And whatever people are saying in these op-eds, saying that Russia is the strong one and Ukraine is the weak one, well, that may be true, but at the same time, Russia's not advanced. It's a stalemate. It's a complete and absolute stalemate. And at this point, it's effectively a high-tech drone war where nobody can go into the no man's land of a front line because a Russian drone will kill a Ukrainian and a Ukrainian drone will kill a Russian. Interestingly, the Russians don't seem to care, and so they continue to send in soldiers who get killed on a daily basis. Like roughly 1,000 men a day die on the front line from Russia because they're being forced to go in to try to find weak spots. But the Ukrainians don't have many weak spots, and their drones are pretty good, and they're killing those soldiers. And so this war is not going anywhere fast in either direction. But Putin thinks that if he just waits long enough, everybody in the West will grow tired of the war, that Ukraine survives off of the goodwill of Western countries. And if there's no Western countries supporting Ukraine, then Ukraine will eventually fall. That's Putin's bet. And Trump pulled out, and Putin thought, well, okay, now is his chance. And then he discovered that actually, even without U.S. military aid, Ukraine can still hold the Russians back.
Another thing that they've been doing, the Ukrainian army, I should say, that you and I have spoken about, Bill, is of course targeting these Russian oil refineries. Now, since August, Ukraine's drone strikes on Russia's oil refineries have taken out 17% of its oil refinery capacity. But Reuters is now reporting that Russia may soon have to reduce its output because of the combination of these damaged ports, restricted pipelines and storages, and refinery outages may force the output cuts. So just for context for our audience, if just 5% of Russia's output is cut, it's estimated that Russia's economy would lose $200 million a year. That's just 5%. So how significant would this be for an already struggling economy?
Well, as President Zelensky says, if I'm going to impose sanctions myself on Russia, and that's what he's done by taking out these refineries. And as you mentioned, the number was 17%, but I think it's actually higher than that now because every day I see another refinery that's been targeted with drones, and the Russians have no capacity to protect their refineries. And so, and some really big ones have been hit since that 17% number was published. And so I don't know exactly how it's going to, I don't think it's going to end the war, because you should understand that refined products is only a small portion of the revenue that Russia gets from its oil and gas industry. The main revenue it gets is from crude oil, unrefined oil, that gets put onto tankers and then sent to China, India, and Turkey. And that money that oil continues to be exported, and that money continues to come in. And that's the real place that we need to focus on if we want to end up bankrupting Putin so he doesn't have the money to continue the war.
Bill, just a final question. If this comment from Sir Richard Moore is right, and that Russia basically doesn't have the ability to win this war, to take Ukraine by force, aside from sanctions, what should the West be doing to help Ukraine push Russia out?
Well, at this point, Ukraine has started to develop its own arms industry. And it's not as if they're desperately needing to buy American arms anymore, but they do need financial resources in order to build the weapons inside their own country. And so as we pivot away from this desperation for getting American arms towards making their own arms, they're going to need the money. And the money there's got to come from somewhere. The money doesn't grow on trees. And there is one big pot of money that's sitting there, and that pot of money is the $300 billion of frozen Russian central bank reserves. And the more the more time that goes on and the more the money is needed, that money should be not just frozen but confiscated and handed over to Ukraine so they can continue to produce weapons and arms and fight back against the Russians.
So, Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.